My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be Shakespeare and Cleopatra Video 23, Cleopatra and the Old Fishmonger. So this is my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own. And here's a summary. Cleopatra's dead, hovering between life and the afterlife. By some strange process, she becomes aware that a playwright is telling her story. Who is this Shakespeare? What does he know about her? What kind of Cleopatra does he intend to create? He seems to be unaware of her presence, but perhaps if she talks to him as he writes, she can exercise some control over the story of a life that she fears is no longer her own. Now, I want to hold up this book. Shakespeare's sitting in her room writing, and he's writing a play. Now, you and I'm the writer and you're the reader. We know it's Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra has come back from the afterlife. All she knows is that a playwright's writing about her. Within a few chapters of thought, she's told by some strange agency that it's Shakespeare of the Globe Theatre in England, but she doesn't know anything about him. She can't read English either, so she looks over his shoulder. She's not sure what he's writing about her. And that's why her concern. Cleopatra is in the room in which Shakespeare is sitting at a table and writing his new play, Antony and Cleopatra. As Cleopatra talks to him about her past life, she recalls a story about an old fishmonger. The fishmonger story is an example of what I would call deepening imagery. After I read Cleopatra's thoughts about the old fishmonger, I will talk about Shakespeare's use of deepening imagery in the play which he's writing, Antony and Cleopatra. The story of the old fishmonger is present in each of the 16 chapters of thought in the mind of the main character, Cleopatra. So, let me read it then. These are thoughts inside the mind of the main character of this novel, Cleopatra, among other thoughts. So there's only one section in each chapter of 16 chapters of thought. Here's what Cleopatra thinks. I used to go down to the market in Alexandria. I would go there very early in the morning. I would disguise myself in nondescript clothes. Of course, she was the queen and didn't want anybody to know who she was. I would stand in the street and send a servant. I would send a servant to buy the fish early in the morning when the market had just come alive. And there was a very elderly lady wielding a knife and cutting off the fish heads, and she would chatter away to her grandson as she worked. Eventually, I learned the old fishwoman's story. Morning after morning I listened, day after day, standing and waiting as my servant bought the fish. The old fish lady never held anything back. To her, the boy was like an eager messenger, a messenger with the wind in his face and his hair. The old fish lady was a born storyteller. She would let the boy out and then rein him in, and all the while she was wielding a very sharp knife. How she met the boy's grandfather, how they loved and how they lost. It was such a romantic story that anyone but me would have cried. How a son was born to her, the boy's father, who later died. The boy would listen as the old lady worked. He was nothing but ears. Okay, now chapter 9. I began to think that someday this was going to be me. An elderly lady carrying on amid the debris, explaining the pieces of a crumbled statue to curious eyes. Perhaps you're wondering about the continuance of the old fisherwoman's story, about the future events of the tale that the old woman told. In actuality, it was not much different than any other old woman might have told. The old fishwoman's husband had drowned in a gale. Her son had died of wounds he suffered while defending the queen. The boy's mother had died in childbirth, leaving the boy. The fish had been foolish enough to be caught, or unfortunate enough, one might say, whatever each of those terms might seem to mean. The little old fish lady stood there chopping the fish heads, dropping each one into a basket, then filleting what was left with her very sharp knife. No story ever has an ending. The days and the nights go on and on. Every story loses interest after a while. The story seemed important to the old fishwoman. I have no idea what the story meant to the boy. I decided to send a servant to buy the fish. And the last section of this story is this. I get tired of people telling stories. Only once in a while does a story enchant the ear. That's the story that drives the others from the stage. So that's Cleopatra's story, which she tells to herself, she thinks to herself, about the old fishmonger. In my introduction to this video, I said that the old fishmonger story is an example of deepening imagery. Cleopatra recalls this story so it can be compared and contrasted with her own life in an attempt to understand the two aspects of her life that are most important to her. Number one, her relationships with other people while she was alive, most notably with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And number two, her relationship with William Shakespeare, who had so much control over the way in which her life will be presented to the people who come after her. Whether or not she tells this story to Shakespeare and hopes that he will reach a certain depth of understanding about her life, Cleopatra is attempting, whether consciously or subconsciously, to deepen her own understanding of her own story. She does this by interlayering imagery from another source, another image quarry, with information about her personal life. Here's a passage from the play that Shakespeare's writing as she talks to him, Antony and Cleopatra, in which the character who is Cleopatra in that play adds imagery to the information about the life of Mark Antony for the same reason, in order to deepen others' understanding and her own understanding of her relationship with Antony. So here's a passage from the play Antony Cleopatra, in which Cleopatra is speaking about Antony. His legs bestrid the ocean, his reared arm crested the world. His voice was propertied as all the tuned spheres, and that to friends. But when he meant to quail and shake the orb, he was as rattling thunder. For his bounty there was no winter in it, and autumn 'twas, that grew the more by reaping. His delights were dolphin-like, they showed his back above the element they lived in. In his livery walked crowns and crownets, realms and islands where his plates dropped from his pocket. Now in this passage we can separate in our minds the topic and the imagery, two separate things going on in that passage. As for the topic, Cleopatra is talking about and therefore thinking about the Roman general Mark Antony, with whom she's had a relationship. She talks about Antony's legs, his arm, his voice, his bounty, his delights, and his livery, which in modern terms is his clothing. Livery equal clothing. Now, all of these attributes of Mark Antony, of the topic, can be said to be common to every person, from the highest in a given society to the lowest, right? Common attributes. Arms, legs, so on. However, in order to distinguish Mark Antony from the common run of men, Cleopatra applies imagery to these everyday attributes. To the common attribute of Antony's legs, Cleopatra adds as deepening imagery that his legs bestrid the ocean. To the common human attribute of Antony's arm, everybody has one, Cleopatra adds a deepening imagery that his arm crested the world. To the common human attribute of Antony's voice, Cleopatra adds a deepening imagery that it was propertied as the tuned spheres to friends, but it was as rattling thunder to the point that the earth would shake when Antony was angry. And so the speech continues in this form. To each common human attribute, Cleopatra adds a superhuman image in order to impress upon others that Antony has and deserves the stature of a superhuman cosmic figure in the life of humankind. An interesting aspect of Cleopatra's use of deepening imagery is that the higher she raises Antony in the minds of others, the higher she raises Antony in her own mind. And since she's portraying herself as Antony's consort, with she and Antony as the great immortal lovers, Cleopatra is applying this deepening imagery, this cosmic deepening imagery to herself. So you raise Antony up, you raise yourself up if you connect the two together. As Shakespeare knew, and as all writers of serious literature know, deepening imagery suggests potential meaning in the minds of characters and in the mind of the reader of a novel or the viewer of a play. However, in the poetic play and in the poetic novel, we, the viewer and reader, are not told whether the application of imagery to a topic is being done consciously or subconsciously by the thinker, who in this case is Cleopatra. So the thoughts of the character Cleopatra, or the thoughts of the character Shakespeare, if he's listening, concerning the relevance of the story of the old fishmonger, are not presented in the text of the novel. So you get the imagery of the fishmonger, but you're not told what Cleopatra thinks about it when compared to her own life, and you don't even know whether Shakespeare hears it. And if he does hear it, you don't know what he thinks it sort of means to him or to Cleopatra. So here's my novel, Shakespeare and Cleopatra, My Life is Not My Own. It's for sale on Amazon, where there's more information. It's also to be found on my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com, where there's more information. On my website, johnpassfield.ca, there are 2 free books about this book. One is the planning notebook, in which I recorded all the details of my planning and writing of the novel. And the other is a journal in which I reflected on all the aspects that writing such a novel raises in the mind. And both of them can be accessed for free and read just by going to johnpassfield.ca. Just click on the cover icon and you'll have the book in each case to read. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.